The story of Newman 6 is a story about outrage, disrespect, rebellion, and tenacity. In our Frontera community of El Paso, we know we are living through a climate emergency. In our desert region, we are living through droughts, and our water is scarce, yet it is vulnerable to the water-hungry fossil fuel industry. We are the 10th sunniest city in the world, yet the corporation which controls our electric grid only uses 5% renewable energy. El Paso Electric Company profits off of our city's connection to the climate-destroying, world-implicating Permian Basin oil fields. Using dangerous pipelines, they hook up 3 major polluting gas plants to the fracking of the Permian Basin. These asthma-causing, climate-polluting gas plants are the Newman Generating Station in the northeast, the Rio Grande gas plant in the lower west, and the Montana Vista gas plant in the far east. The corporate system we live under is so beneficial to the fossil fuel industry, it caught the attention of JP Morgan Chase Bank, the largest financier of the climate crisis. The private equity firm bought out our electric grid in 2019. Under the direction of the newly appointed CEO Kelly Tomlin, El Paso Electric's first move in its new phase of corporate ownership was an affront to the climate. They proposed to expand the Newman fracked-gas generating station with a massive 228 megawatt 6th turbine, the so-called Newman 6. Located along the state line between northeast El Paso and Chaparral, New Mexico, the expansion of Newman 6 was determined to increase the station's emissions to 1.3 million tons of CO2 per year. It was an attack on the climate, and it was also an irresponsible use of El Paso ratepayer dollars. During an unprecedented era of the climate crisis, the corporation aimed to spend $163 million of ratepayer funds to expand for more fossil fuels instead of investing in a transition to renewables. Sunrise El Paso organizers teamed up with Frontline community members, leaders, local organizations, scientists, researchers, activists, and movement lawyers to speak out against the proposal via the community-driven No Newman 6 campaign. Frontline community leaders in Chaparral and parts of northeast El Paso had expressed outrage at the proposal to expand the facility, increasing their exposure to emissions already producing devastating environmental outcomes and enabling a public health crisis in their part of the community. This is the story of how the fight against a horrible gas plant transformed into the birth of a new, bold, transformative ballot initiative, the El Paso Climate Charter.
My name is Ida Garcia, and I live here in Chaparral, New Mexico, very close to the plant, about 1.5 miles to the new Newman 6 that is being constructed, and presently the power plant that's there on Stan Roberts.
And I'm Dr. David J. Garcia. I lived here 4 or 5 years. 5 years, going on 5 years. Recently I had a bout with a respiratory illness, and I'm still working, and every day that I get up and look out my bedroom window, I see the smoke spewing from El Paso Electric. the plant really was like the neighbor's kids used to call it the castle. Why they called it the castle is beyond me, but
All the lights.
The lights at night pretty much make it look like a castle. Recently I've been very angry. That anger has turned into sadness, because I think what is happening is like, you see a burning car on the side of the road and nobody offering assistance. Why? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it that they don't understand? Or is it that we really need the electrical power that they provide to us on a daily basis? So I go from being angry to being sad, and then kind of reflecting on the damage that they're doing to our environment. And I wonder what it's going to take to change that.
Oh, well, it has affected me in my health. I mean, well, I am a cancer survivor, but the thing is that about 2-3 years ago, I had, soon after we moved over here.
Southwest.
I got the Southwest Valley fever, and I got these nodules in my lungs, and I'm not a smoker. And when I asked the doctor, he said, oh, it's probably where you live. It's your environment. And I mean, immediately I thought, oh my gosh, we're so close to that plant. Fortunately, they did go away, and he said that, but he did mention it was the environment. So it makes me think that, it is affecting our health, not only my husband and myself, but all the people. And if you talk to our local doctor, she says that there's a lot of people with asthma here in Chaparral and cancer, and we really don't know if it's from the plant, but it could be, and that's something that we need to be concerned about.
I sometimes feel inept, meaning like defenseless, frustrated, and sometimes sad, wanting to cry. A grown man like 71 crying, but it's because I know deep in my heart that what we're doing and El Paso Electric is doing is absolutely wrong. And I wonder sometimes if I made a mistake with deciding the location where we live. Of all the places in the world, why here? And I understand and worry about the people in Chaparral, because if it affects me, it affects them, and it affects people in the world. But there's actually other sources, wind, solar, but these companies are not moving to do that because they're in the game to make money. And the fastest way to make money is to continue doing what they're doing.
When we first got involved, it was just, it was actually a flyer that we saw, and we read it, and I think that first made us aware. And then, of course, we decided to bring in some other people from the community and meet, informally here at our house. And we actually came up with Chaparral Community Coalition for Health and Environment, because we knew that it was going to involve health and environment. And we also had many residents that we had the Sisters of Assumption, we had a doctor, we had some other residents that attended the meetings. And at that point, I think they were also amazed at what was happening. And the group itself met several times. And then, of course, we were my neighbor, which is Lori, and we were called to testify. And of course, that was very stressful, but I think in the long run it was very much worth it.
How long has it been since we went to court with El Paso Electric?
Led by the strong voices of David and Ida Garcia, the coalition to stop the Newman 6 fracked gas plant aimed at preventing the project from many different angles. The city government of El Paso refused to take enough action against El Paso Electric. not brave or strong enough to stand up to the company. The New Mexico state government actually rejected the permit for Newman 6, making it illegal for El Paso Electric to sell its gas-generated electricity to New Mexico. Nonetheless, stubborn to install more fossil fuels, El Paso Electric continued their efforts to build the gas plant to sell gas to Texas. Likewise, the federal government agencies like the EPA did not step up to reject the permit, though the EPA was an essential piece of the puzzle later on in the story. The coalition actually found most leverage to stop Newman 6 in the Texas state government. The coalition protested El Paso Electric's air permit before the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. Hundreds of community members submitted comments in opposition to the project. On the ground, Sunrise El Paso and the ally group Earthworks organized with the directly impacted local community of Chaparral to fight for what's called a contested case hearing. Essentially, this is a trial where a TCEQ judge hears the perspective of the community versus that of the polluter and makes a decision on whether or not to grant this air permit. Despite systemic barriers and the TCEQ's extreme pro-fossil fuel bias, the Chaparral community won standing, and the trial began. At the beginning of the trial, the Chaparral community, represented by lawyers from the Sierra Club and the Environmental Integrity Project, felt fairly confident El Paso Electric would drop their Newman 6 project. Why? EPA ozone regulations. El Paso polluters like El Paso Electric emit ozone above the EPA's threshold. Ozone pollution is very serious. It causes health impacts like respiratory illnesses. A lawsuit in 2018, led by the community group Familias Unidas de Chamizal, forced the EPA to regulate local polluters to reduce these ozone emissions. El Paso Electric nearly dodged the regulations, but Chaparral's standing in this lawsuit ensured that EPA ozone rules would apply to the utility. The lawsuit process, played all the way through, lasts about 6 months. Passing the deadline, EPA would kick in their ozone rules. Since Newman 6 would emit ozone precursors like NOx and VOCs, the hope of this coalition was that the cost of the EPA's new regulations and rules would actually discourage El Paso Electric from continuing their project. Getting our foot in the door with this lawsuit was a victory because despite systemic barriers, we delayed the project enough to prevent El Paso Electric from avoiding important EPA regulations on ozone, which had the potential to topple Newman 6. Summer of 2001, the contested case hearing took place. It was a trial for climate and health. On the one hand, the Chaparral group made their case for how the Newman 6 project would impact their health. On the other, El Paso Electric sought to delegitimize the experience and perspective of the Chaparral community, including the Garcias.
And the group itself, met several times, and then of course we were my neighbor, which is Lori, and I. We were called to testify, and of course that was very stressful. But I think in the long run it was very much worth it. Yeah, they were pretty threatening, I guess, when they were questioning us. Both Lori and I felt like oh my gosh,
scary.
Even though, we had worked with one of the attorneys beforehand telling us to prepare and, kind of, but he kind of, it was Colin that, and he was very good at talking to us, but I don't think we knew what we were getting into when we were actually questioned. It was very stressful, and I think that, I mean, I just felt like, oh my gosh, we're gonna lose. You know, I was so like worried that we were gonna lose, or
What
that
you're
we're
saying.
yeah, what we're gonna say was not. But it was empowering in a way, because I don't know. I thought that the attorneys from El Paso Electric were going the wrong direction when they were asking the questions. It was like, what are they talking about? I mean, it just seemed like, they were talking about the distance, and it to me it was totally, I said, why are they doing that? It didn't make sense to me.
It was always a high probability that the TCEQ would grant El Paso Electric their pollution permit. The TCEQ is hopelessly and systemically captured by industry as an environmental agency. Yet, the Chaparral community held an important leverage point over El Paso Electric. They held the power to squeeze out the full length of the trial to ensure EPA regulations would kick in before the TCEQ granted El Paso Electric their permit for Newman 6, placing enough burden on El Paso Electric to drop Newman 6. The strategy seemed viable until El Paso Electric demonstrated the full extent of their financial capital. For the first time since the campaign began in August of 2020, the community built enough people power and legal leverage to sit at the negotiating table with this $4.3 billion corporation. Throughout the lawsuit process, El Paso Electric begged the Chaparral community to settle, offering minor environmental concessions to the community. Chaparral never budged because they knew they held the power to force EPA regulations on El Paso Electric if they played out the entire lawsuit process till the end. Yet, all of Chaparral's previous leverage crumbled when in August of 2021, El Paso Electric offered the community a settlement package which conceded to voluntarily adhere to the EPA ozone regulations. The same regulations the community sought to force through the delay caused by completing the lawsuit. By offering to follow EPA regulations preemptively and on their own, EPE signaled they had enough financial capital to shoulder ozone regulations and still move forward with Newman 6. The community felt pushed into a corner. They lost their main leverage because El Paso Electric was too powerful of a corporation. The EPA's system of ozone reduction allows corporations to purchase a sort of license to pollute through pollution offsets. In an ideal world, if the government wants to force a corporation to reduce emissions, they would knock on the business's door and say, hey, you are now legally required to reduce pollution at your sites. Do it or you are in trouble. But that's not how the federal ozone system works. They allow corporations to keep their sites' current production basically the same, requiring only for the company to buy offsets of emissions at other locations. The community could not depend on the TCEQ to reject EPE's Newman permit at the end of the lawsuit because they are hopelessly captured by the industry. Importantly, the El Paso City Council failed to take political action against Newman 6, despite giving a legal roadmap of how to reject El Paso Electric's plans. At this point, the community decided settlement was the only way to gain some material wins. There was no alternative. Through fierce negotiations, the Chaparral community was able to force really important concessions from El Paso Electric. This included millions of dollars worth of environmental concessions. It was the result of a year of consistent grassroots movement building.
You know, we reached a settlement, but I reflect back on that settlement, and now I feel bad about it because I think it was like a payoff. And, you know, and realizing the construction, the pipelines that have been laid, the work that they're doing at the Newman 6 now, it is just baffling, and it's scary. And because it's too easy for them to get permits and do what they want to do because they got the money. And I think that's an injustice to the people, because there's no way you can compete legally with a company that has 30, 40 lawyers with the people's 1 or 2 lawyers. It just doesn't happen, you know, and legally they have us over a wheelbarrow, and they're taking advantage of that fact.
Oh, well, I felt like we should have kept fighting. I felt very defeated, okay, and I wanted to keep fighting. And in fact, when we decided to settle, you know, it really made me feel not only frustrated but defeated. And then I kept thinking, well, you know, I mean, I knew that it was costing too much to keep going. So it was kind of like we didn't have,
sword.
Yeah, we didn't really have too much of a choice, you know. And then, of course, you know, the amount that we were given seemed such a little amount, even though, I mean, it seemed like a lot to a lot of people, but in the long run, when we realized how much we had gotten, it really didn't seem like that much. I mean, money sometimes, you know, it just seems so insignificant. I just felt like, well, you know, okay, so they paid us this amount, but, you know, really to think about it, you know, I just wanted to say, you know, who cares about the money? You know, we need to get this other things done. We need to shut down.
But there always was that fear that we might lose one, that it was costing too much money. So the way I saw it is, well, maybe a little benefit for the community will be good, but that wasn't a good trade-off at all.
And what are we looking at right now?
No.
Is that what's going on right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So right now we're getting ready. He's getting ready, putting all his food on, so he saves himself.
For right now, in regards to Newman 6, I guess I can say that I oversee a lot of the construction regarding underground bank. How are we connecting these?
What can you tell me about Newman 6?
It's my very first plant that I'm building, and it's going to be one of the best. So
we're looking at all that work going on. They're backfilling this area because they have some more work to be done. A lot of the electrical work that you don't see right now is underground. So as you see, they just set up this new crane because they're going to be lifting up the heavy equipment. But that's typically what they're doing right here, is just backfilling, prepping for concrete pours. And we just continue plugging along because we want to have backfeed by the end of the year.
Government agencies at all levels failed to protect us from this abhorrent fossil fuel proposal. Despite its criminal climate impact, its irresponsible use of El Paso ratepayer dollars, its health impact on the lungs of El Pasoans and community members of Chaparral, the construction on Newman 6 began, and we were devastated. Though bitter, the trial resulted in material gains for the climate, the environment, and people's health. Here is some of what was won. A legal commitment to never expand the Newman facility in Chaparral ever. This is significant since El Paso Electric had previously published plans of a Newman 7 and potentially a Newman 8 at Chaparral. Our coalition disrupted these business plans. A 4-year moratorium on any fossil fuel projects in their service territory. As far as we know, it is unprecedented in the US for a for-profit, monopolized utility to make this type of commitment. In 4 years, much can happen, including full democratization of the utility at a local level, or a federally mandated ban on fossil fuels. A legal commitment to shut off 2 polluting gas turbines at the Newman gas plant and the Rio Grande gas plant. One of the worst parts of living under a utility that is a corporate dictatorship is that El Paso Electric Company can make promises to the public, but don't have any legal requirements to follow through. To sell the public on Newman 6, El Paso Electric promised to retire 2 older gas generators, but they never filled out the paperwork to do so. The coalition's organizing forced them to legally commit. A 40% reduction of NOx emissions from Newman 6. NOx is an ozone-creating pollutant which directly causes respiratory illnesses. We brought those levels down. Additionally, a 40% reduction of carbon dioxide emissions from Newman 6. El Paso Electric's original permit allowed for the Newman gas plant to emit up to 1.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. The agreement requires El Paso Electric to reduce CO2 pollution from Newman 6 by 500,000 tons, the equivalent of taking 100,000 cars off the road, or planting 8 million trees. Additionally, part of the settlement was $400,000 in funds for community use, geared towards health advocacy and environmental impact mitigation. In our coalition, we were both heartbroken, but filled with motivation to keep the fight alive. The Chaparral group could have decided to quit the struggle then and there. They could have decided to use the settlement funds to simply build a park and call it a day. Discouraged by the dysfunction of the government, they could have decided to not attempt to pressure El Paso Electric further.
My thing was that we were bought off. Throw them a few crumbs and they'll shut up because we were making too much noise. So the agreement, $400,000 to El Paso Electric is nothing. If they can excavate a big 20-inch pipe all the way from the west side to the east side through the mountains and bedrocks and stuff, that's they're making money. There was no social justice in the settlement. Just be quiet. Here's a few crumbs. Did
they shut you up?
No, they didn't.
Some of these very settlement funds became the seed money for the beginning of a new climate justice project to keep El Paso Electric accountable and to shut down their Newman gas plant. The El Paso Climate Charter. As a coalition, we brainstormed, we researched, we consulted with lawyers, experts, and engineers to draft a first-of-its-kind ballot initiative for climate action. We had big barriers to shut down the gas plants and the refineries and to transition to renewables. But the main barrier was our community's lack of power in our electric grid and in our city government. Thus, the Climate Charter was born. If the ballot initiative was passed, this climate policy program would fundamentally transform the goals and the responsibilities of the municipal city government. It would create a strong climate department, headed by a climate director, and held accountable by a climate commission, comprised of community members from each district. The Climate Department would set our clean, renewable energy goals. 80% renewable energy from our electric grid by 2030, and 100% by 2045. The department would track climate emissions from polluting sites like Newman 6, increase renewable usage, and create climate jobs. Additionally, it would conserve our water, preventing our water from being used for fossil fuel purposes outside of city limits. Importantly, it would mandate the city study the feasibility of municipalizing El Paso Electric, which means converting it from a privatized, monopolized, for-profit corporation into a publicly owned utility, with the interests of our community and the planet prioritized. The Climate Charter represents a defiance of the status quo, a rebellion, a commitment to fight bravely and creatively at the local level, to not give up and keep fighting.
And then, of course, we decided to give back, so that the El Paso Climate Charter could be started. And, I think we just felt that was important, because that was what we wanted to do to keep fighting. And that's the reason we decided on that. And I really feel strongly about the charter, and I really feel that that's a big step in our fight to, just continue.
To hold them accountable.
Well, and also to continue the fight, so that we can shut down some of those plants.
And we're gonna have high aspirations that the coalition will get that thing passed. I think that providing electrical energy to people using alternative methods like geothermal, solar, wind, try everything other than fracked gas.
Yeah, that would be, I think we need to look at the renewable energies so that we can make a difference. And I know I always think about shutting down the plants, but they're providing a service, so we have to have something to replace it. Yeah.
Just recently, I saw on the news that United States is planning on landing on the moon and actually taking people there. If we're so advanced and with technology and things, and we are, a new stealth fighter, very incredible, and yet how can we not solve the problem of the greenhouse effect and the stuff that we're doing through this industry?
I've talked to people about it, and it's like they're just so unaware. I feel like we haven't really educated our residents here in Chaparral, and they're not concerned. They just say, well, it's been there forever. We just drive by it. But knowing what I know now, I want to tell them, you're breathing that air, and it's coming to our community, and we need to do something, to stop it. And I feel very, I don't know, I guess I want to get the information out there. I want them to know what it's doing. And this is another reason I, really have become involved in this cause, because it's something that is very important to me.
Do you think there's hope?
Yeah, I do. I think there's hope, because I think that with this new charter, the El Paso Charter, I think, we're going to, continue. And that's what our whole goal is, to continue fighting. And, like you said, it's going to be a long haul, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop, because we need to look forward to, when we can shut down some of those and go into renewable energy. And we know as a fact, because we have solar right now, and we know, it is expensive, but, you do see the benefits. I would want someone to vote for the El Paso Climate Charter, because I see that it could make a difference. And I think that by educating the residents and so that they know why it's important to vote, it's going to make a big difference. They need to know why it's so important. And this is a reason that I fully support the El Paso Climate Charter.
One thing was creating this unique climate action program. Another thing entirely was organizing the mass mobilization needed to place the measure on the ballot. In an enormous effort, we collected almost 40,000 signatures of El Pasoans supporting this project. Now it's officially on the ballot for the May elections as Proposition K. We are seeing aggressive opposition and dirty tactics from El Paso Electric, Marathon Petroleum, and the El Paso Chambers of Commerce. Our campaign is fighting back and talking to voters to win Proposition K. On Saturday, May 6th, El Paso will vote. We will decide whether to maintain the broken status quo or to boldly fight for climate justice.
In this fight, and it's climate change, the fight of climate change is going to take all of us. And the more people are within that group, the better we're going to be able to defeat it, because it's going to take all of us, not just one or two. So if I can convince you to come along with me, it's like the first step of a 1,000 miles or a long journey. And I see it as the first few steps, like when Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon, one big step for mankind. We need one big step for mankind regarding climate change. And I hopefully that it'll come soon.